Director of the Swami Vivekananda Cultural Center at the Consulate General of India in Durban, Dr. Chaitanya Prakash Yogi, Pandit Lokesh Maharaj, Mr. Rajesh Lachman, Ms. Yudhisha Balikaran, Mr. Sipiwayam Chunu, Mr. Piyush Khandelwal, distinguished guests, online members and listeners, namaskar and welcome to the third episode of Aarshdhara. Today we will be depicting the Samveda, and Aarshdhara is an interaction of scriptures composed by Indian sages. And in our midst today, I would like to welcome Mr. Rajesh Lachman, the COO of Hindwani Radio, for this introductory remarks. This program is in association with the Hindi Siksha Sangh of South Africa. Namaste and welcome, Rajesh Ji.
Thank you, Shrisi Ji. Namaste. Thank you for those kind words. Dr. Yogi, Pandit Lokesh Maharaj Ji, Piyush Ji, Yudhisha Ji, Simpiwe Ji, and of course our radiant program facilitator, that's Shrisi Ji. Thank you so much for having the Hindi Siksha Sangh as part of this program. Aarshdhara is a series of 4 lectures that attempt to unpack some of the wonderful information and knowledge contained in the Vedas. Today is the Samveda, and of course we have an expert in Pandit Lokesh Maharaj who's going to be talking to us in depth. But the interesting thing about the Samveda is that it is also regarded as perhaps the version of the Rig Veda that is referred to as the music version. As Samveda, both the North Indian and South Indian Carnatic music systems consider that their birth is the Samveda. In other words, the development of the true systems of music comes from the Samveda. Another very exciting thing about the Vedas or the Samveda is that the way it has been constructed, it is meant to be heard rather than read, or you need to listen to it rather than, let's say, recite it. So, it's amazing how the sages of many years ago, and this we're talking about 1,000 years BC at least, that they had such a wonderful perspective of what life is and in terms of our spiritual development. Of course, Lokesh Bhai is going to talk to us more about this, and I'm deeply grateful to him for making the time available for being here today. Thank you very much. Do enjoy the rest of the session, and I'm sure we're going to leave you highly inspired, and of course, we'll learn a little bit more about the Samveda. Namaste.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rajesh Lachman, for those beautiful introductory remarks on Samveda. Today, in our midst, we have the very renowned Pandit Lokesh Maharaj, who will be interviewed by, or rather interacting with the beautiful Ms. Yudhisha Balikaran, who is a journalist and a radio presenter. Dr. Lokesh Ramnath Maharaj is a senior lecturer in the Curriculum and Education Studies in the School of Education at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. He has tertiary qualifications in Hindi and Sanskrit. In the year 2011, he graduated with a PhD entitled The Bhagavad Gita for Values Education in Life Orientation, Perceptions and Possibilities. He is currently one of the leading researchers with academics from the University of Delhi in a project on yoga, religion, and education in India and South Africa. Dr. Maharaj is a member of the Executive Committee of the Sri Sanatan Dharma Sabha of South Africa. He also heads the Priests Council of the South African Mahasabha. Namaste and welcome, Pandit Lokesh Maharaj and Yudhisha Balikaran Ji today for their interaction on episode of Aarshdhara covering the Samveda.
My prem namaste, loving greetings to one and all of you. Once again, it gives me great honor and an absolute privilege to be part of this dynamic series called Aarshdhara. Like you, our listener, as well as our viewer, for those of you who are watching this via Facebook, I have learned and continue to learn so much about our ancient scriptures, and I look forward to yet another vibrant and interesting episode, this one on the Samaved. Just to reiterate, our very first episode was on the Rig Veda, which is considered the oldest known Vedic Sanskrit text. The Sanskrit word Rig translates to praise or shine, and this ancient text comprises a large collection of hymns in praise of Bhagavan. Our second episode focused on the Yajur Veda. Now, the name is derived from the Sanskrit root yajus, meaning worship. And this Ved centers around sacred ceremonies and rituals performed in Hinduism. Today, we have with us Panditji Lokesh Maharaj, and he will be directing the spotlight on the Samveda. Panditji, my hearty namaste to you. How are you doing this evening?
Namaste. I'm very well, thank you. And thank you for this opportunity to share with everybody information on the Samveda.
Bahut dhanyavad, Panditji. We can get right into it. Firstly, if you can give our listeners as well as our viewers a brief and simple introduction of the Samveda.
Yeah, thank you very, very much. So as I think we all are aware, the Samveda is an ancient Vedic, forms part of the 4 Vedas. The Samveda is actually the shortest of all the Vedas. It consists of 1,549 verses. The word Sama means melody, and Veda, of course, we know means knowledge. The Samveda has been described, as Rajesh Bhai had alluded to earlier, it has been described as the book of song, or the Veda of chants, or even as the yoga of song. It actually contains the words of the Rig Veda in music. And that's a point that Rajesh Bhai also mentioned earlier. And he also spoke about the recitation of the Samveda. And what we know is that the Samveda is sung. So if we really want to appreciate the value of the Samveda, it's best when it is sung, because it's made up of melodies and chants. Of course, it is also used in the application, or it's compiled for ritual application. Its verses are chanted at ceremonies such as the Soma sacrifice, for example. And the deities that predominate in the Samveda are Indra, Agni, and Soma. And of course, it contains praise that is dedicated to the Supreme Being, or what we refer to as Brahman. And the major theme of the Samveda is centered on worship and devotion. And the Samveda actually directs us that the glorious Lord and Brahman, the Supreme Being, are attainable only through devotion and as well as musical chanting. Of course, the Samveda consists of a Samhita, which is the hymns in ritual context. It also contains the Brahmana, which describes the procedures that are to be followed before and during the chanting of the Samveda, Samhita. It also contains topics on social customs, as well as on how to counter bad omens. The Chandogya Upanishad is said to be part of the Samveda, and it includes a discussion on the syllable Om, which is, of course, a sacred utterance in any Hindu tradition. And Om has been described as the source of being, which is superior, of course, to any ritual. So in short, then, the Samveda holds an important place in the Hindu context, and it has shaped Hindu beliefs and practices down the centuries.
Thank you very much for that very interesting introduction to the Samveda. Panditji, could you tell us, dance music plays such an important part of Hindu culture, and the Samveda focusing on this. How is the scripture considered important. During your study of the Samveda, did you find any research about it, about the importance, or how does it relate to our Hindu culture? That's being dance and music, which the Samveda focuses on.
Okay, no, thank you for that question. So, firstly, as far as the Samveda is a scripture, our Vedas have been described as apaurushaya, which means that it is authorless. So it is not ascribed to any particular human being. So the belief is that rishis and sages who were in contemplation received this knowledge of the Veda. So the Samveda as a scripture is important because it is not really written by any human being as such. Although if one reads the Mahabharata, the credit to the Vedas in the Mahabharata is given to Lord Brahma. But of course, according to tradition, we know that Vyasji is supposed to have been the compiler of the Vedas. But of course, the Vedas, or the Samveda, represents the spiritual knowledge and the power of devotion. And as I said, this was revealed, and it is believed that the Samveda was revealed to a rishi by the name of Vayu, and it consists of actually the hymns of the Rig Veda, which is put to a musical measure. So the Samveda really is an alternative version of the Rig Veda, and this is what makes it an important scripture. Now, as far as research is concerned, there's of course a plethora of scholarly works on the Vedas, including the Samveda. But for the purposes of our discussion, let me mention two very quickly. One is an article that was called The Philosophical Foundations of Indian Music. And this was written by a scholar by the name of Dr. Regiman. And Dr. Regiman argues that like all other Indian classical performing arts, classical music is a journey of the Jeev Atma towards the Param Atma, or the divine. So he avers in his article or in his research that Indian music represents the emotions of the soul in the presence of nature. He reminds us that the origin of Indian music is said to be rooted in the Vedas. And it is said that God himself is a musical sound. So that's one piece of scholarly work that I have come across. There's also another work that has been written by scholars at the Maharshi University of Spirituality, Jayant Balaji Athavale and Bhavna Shinde, talk about how in physics it is commonly known fact that sound, however loud that sound may be, it cannot be converted efficiently into useful forms of physical energy. However, a fact that is unknown, they continue to tell us, in modern science, is that sound is a manifestation of the absolute ether principle, what we refer to as the Akash Tattva. And they say that this can generate spiritual energy, which can further be used for spiritual purposes. So the sound of mantras from the Vedas has spiritual energy associated with it. And hence they are recited during various rituals. So the authors of this article, which is actually dealing with the spiritually positive effects of mantras, they say that a spiritual energy is subtle. However, it is not easy to measure it with physical instruments. So they conducted a series of experiments using aura and subtle energy scanners that demonstrate the effect of the spiritual energy of mantras on people and the environment. So there's two examples of research that I have come across, which I find to be very useful in our understanding of the Vedas, particularly the Samveda. Thank you.
That's indeed very interesting, Panditji. Especially when you spoke about the soul, the Atma, traveling to Paramatma, and it's using music. That I found very, very interesting.
Yeah.
Certainly, I know for me, on a lighter note, music really, really plays a very important part. I think I won't be able to get my housework done if I was not listening to music. So definitely music plays an important part, I think, for everyone. This is a question that I ask to most of the professors and scholars of the ancient scriptures when we are in conversation about so. I'm always very interested to know, because our ancient scriptures were written centuries ago, and when we look at modern day living, how is it that the scriptures are relevant in this day and age? What would you say is the relevance and importance of the Samveda in our present modern day living?
Okay, so firstly, see, according to the Vedas, or according to scholars of the Vedas, right, Indian classical music and dance is rooted in what we call the sonic or the musical dimensions of the Samveda, the Upanishads, and as well as the Agamas, right? The Samveda, in addition to singing and chanting, mentions instruments as well. And the rules and the suggestions for playing various instruments forms a separate compilation, actually, and it's referred to as the Gandharva Veda. And this Upaveda is attached to the Samaveda. And you'll find that the structure and the theory of chants in the Samveda have inspired the organizing principle for Indian classical arts and performances. So today, Ivisha, you can enjoy the music thanks to the Samaveda and the kind of information that it has provided to us. And so this route has been widely acknowledged by musicologists dealing with the history of Indian music. And Rajesh Bhai alluded to this in his introduction when he said that the North and South music traditions remembers and they cherish the origin in the Samveda or the music tradition that originated in the Samveda. So that's one thing that I find very relevant in the Veda, in the Samaveda. And of course, the Samaveda is a source of musical notes, right? It's referred to as Samaganam. So Sama means song and Ganam means music. Okay, so the books under this Veda, they give a musical touch to the mantras when chanted. What we need to remember is we must be reminded of what Bhagwan Sri Krishna has told us in chapter 10, verse 22 of the Bhagavad Gita. He says, Vedanam Vedosmi, Devanam Asmi Vasavaha, Indriyanam Manaschasmi, Bhutanam Asmi Chetana. He says, I am the Samaved amongst the Vedas and Indra amongst the celestial gods. So you can see from here that the Samved is a highly valued among the Vedas. Of course, there's a verse in the Samaved which I'm going to recite now. It says, Vedatahi niriktinam vajrahasta parivrijam araha shundhandhyu paripadam ivaha. And this actually means that one of the teachings of the Samved is that it is through cleanliness, right? Shundhandhyu, you can keep away diseases. So this particular teaching of the Samved could not be more relevant for the current coronavirus that has taken over the world. So, the human population is increasing day by day. And the elementary necessity for this hugely increasing population is food, it's water, it's clothing, it's housing, it's healthcare facilities, etc. And Hindu scriptures have been very conscious of the environment from the time of the Vedas. And to them, the issue of the environment in all its dimensions is not new. In Indian Vedic culture teaches us to take care of the environment to all its citizens. And for the Hindu, therefore, the relationship with nature starts actually every morning when many recite the Gayatri mantra as an invocation to the sun. Again in the year. So as I have previously mentioned, the Samaved is a book of song. The waves of the raga, and consequently we feel calm and quiet. So it can be averred that the classical music is actually a panacea for modern human beings who are spending their transitory life in sound and fury. So that for me is the relevance of the Samveda in the context that we find ourselves in at present.
Thank you, Panditji. You know, as you were talking, I was also thinking back to, I'm a graduate of the Nateshwar Dance Academy. I've studied the North Indian classical dance form, which is Kathak. And I know during, my mainstream school studies, Kathak actually formed a part of my life where it gave me something to look forward to, other than your mainstream studies. But in that way, it also helped with that as well, because it instills a sense of discipline into the dancer or the singer. Music really, really does have that wonderful impact. It calms the mind as well as gives you the discipline that's needed for other faculties of life. So I totally agree with you. Your explanation about music, song, and dance being such a relevant part of our lives, especially now, as you mentioned, with the coronavirus. Very important to have that aspect in our lives. Now, you have already mentioned some verses from the Samveda, but Panditji, personally, would you like to quote or mention a few more verses from the Samveda, which you consider as an important message or guidance for our present life, especially for our youngsters out there?
Sure. Yes, no, definitely. Of course, you know that, as I said, there are 1,500 verses, but I would like to mention a couple that I think, are very dear to me, especially in terms of as you say, for the current context that we find ourselves in. So one that I'd like to quote is, Ano vayo vayah shayam mahantam gaha vareshtatam mahantam purvanishtham ugram vacho apavadiha. And what this verse of the Samveda is saying to us, it says that we should always refrain from speaking harsh words that inflict pain. Our speech should be such that it gives joy to others. So certainly, in the age that we find ourselves in, especially in terms of the kind of influence that social media is having on us, people really need to be careful about, how we react to others and the kind of words that we use. And there's, good advice given to us by the Samveda, because, it makes a call to human beings to always speak gently. If you think about the tongue, it's always moist. The tongue in the mouth is always moist. And this shows us that our words need to be cool. They must not be harsh. And of course, we know that no weapon is more dangerous and hurting than the tongue. And if you think about it, Bhagwan has given us 2 ears, but only 1 tongue. And I suppose he's probably saying to us that we need to use our ears more than we use our tongues less. So this is one important point that I think we learn from the Samveda. There's, of course, another important thing, because, today, unfortunately, our world is riddled with corruption. And unfortunately, with due respect, corruption is linked to political leaders, to leaders in our, and not only political, but other leaders as well. And so Alasham Suto Vishwa Arshan Abhishriya Indu Indraya Dhiyate. And what this means is, it says, taking over positions of office, the consecrated leader, pioneer, and the brilliant ruler presides over lands and affairs of the order, moving forward and winning all wealth, honors, excellence, and graces of the world for the people, exhorted and exalted by them. So you see, Hindu philosophy again emphasizes selflessness. It emphasizes the ability to govern. It emphasizes commitment to dharma. In fact, the commitment to dharma, which means proper conduct and unwavering morality, are the cornerstones of a leader. integrity and sincerity are the essential ingredients for a good leader. And they are hard to find in the face of the current definition of success. Our definition of success today is that we must get success at any cost. And we need to pause and remind ourselves of this particular verse from the Samveda. I want to do one more verse because, again, I think it's an important verse. It says, A juhota havisha marjayadhvam nihotaram grihapatim dadidhvam idaspade namasarata havyam saparyata yajatam parpastyayanam. It says, honor and adore Agni with Havi. Adorn, embellish, and develop this power of Yagya. Establish this chief of Yagya and presiding spirit of the home in place, and serve this receiver and giver of the gifts of Yagya on the Vedi with humble submission as the most honored member of the family. So Agni is the fire god of Hinduism. It is second perhaps to only Indra in the Vedic scriptures. And Agni is equally the fire of the sun, of lightning, of both the domestic and the sacrificial hearth. So as the divine personification of the fire of sacrifice, he is described as the mouth of the gods. In fact, when people perform Havan, the person performing the Havan, the reciter, mentions a mantra. It says, Om Tvam Mukham Sarva Devanam Saptachir Amadhyute Agacha Bhagwan Agne Yagyasmin Sanidho Bhava Agne Vaishvanara Iha Gaksha Ihatishta. So Iha Gaksha Ihati, we invite Agni to take his rightful place at our Havan Kund, because Tvam Mukham Sarva Devanam, because you are the mouth of all the Devas. So actually, Agni is the messenger between the human and the divine orders. And how does the message get across? It gets across by the word Swaha. Swaha is actually our email ID. It's our email address. That's the word that passes on the message to Agni. So you see the importance that Agni places. And again, Samveda is placing this importance of Agni. And why I mentioned Agni is because if you look at modern Hinduism with all its neo movements, there's so many different sects of Hinduism, which all use the Vedas as their basis, but they have their own perspectives on things. But the one thing that is common among all the sects of Hindus is the Agni or the Havan. No matter who you are, no matter whether you are Arya Samaj, Sanatanist, whether you belong to Ramakrishna, Divine Life, or any neo movement, Agni is invoked in all ceremonies. And so therefore we are encouraged to honor and adore Agni. So these are some of the important verses that I think have relevance for us. And of course, given the COVID conditions that we find ourselves in, I personally see a lot of value in us performing Homa or Agni, because it certainly helps to purify the atmosphere.
Absolutely, Panditji. I agree with you. The Havan being first and foremost, and being a common denominator amongst all Hindus, no matter which following you prefer, or whichever sect, as you mentioned, you do follow. There's a very important point that you brought up. You spoke about social media and people not being au fait with the rules and regulations of social media, in the sense that there's a lot of hatred, a lot of harshness that takes place online. And so you bring up a very good point there, Panditji. The fact that the Samveda also mentions that, speak sweet words, because at the end of the day, that's going to create more impact. Panditji, how has the Samveda as a scripture representing our ancient Indian knowledge, how is it universally applicable to all human beings, or to the whole creation at large?
Okay, thank you. So, of course, one could find evidence throughout the Samveda about how it can be universally applicable to all human beings, and not just people who believe in the Vedas itself. But here again, I want to touch on the idea of music, because for me, music It transcends all borders, it transcends all cultures. And music is the one language that we all understand. So I want to concentrate on music. So as we know that music in the Vedic times was sung and played for entertainment. Of course, its other main purpose was during the performance of the yajna. So music was actually elevated to the status of a Veda. And it came to be reckoned as the Panchama Veda, as the fifth Veda. Right? It was therefore held in high esteem, and it was invested with an aura of spiritual pursuit. So sadhana, spiritual sadhana is spiritual pursuit. So in other words, music has an important part to play in our sadhana, in our pursuit towards higher spirituality. And of course, it can also lead to liberation from the earthly attachments. And what we learned is that for the performer of the music, as well as the good-hearted listener, and in Sanskrit, the good-hearted listener is referred to as Sir Hridaya. So as you need to have a Sir Hridaya, you must be a good-hearted listener. And then you'll find that the pure music or the Sam Gita can be a fulfilling, blessed experience. Yajnavalkya, for example, in his Yajnavalkya Smritis, describes the Sam Gita as the most sublime of all fine arts that pleases and that has the potential to convey all shades of emotions. So, this is a vidya, a knowledge that, if practiced diligently, can lead the aspirant towards liberation. So the recital of poetry, dance performance, drama, songs and instrumental music are equal in merit to the recitation of Vedic hymns. This is what we are reading in the literature. And it reverberates with auspicious sounds of songs and music. So other than entertainment, music has an important role to play in our life. And this is where I'm linking now the music of the Samveda to this universal applicable principle. Because music actually develops our brain and our abilities that are associated with it. It's advantageous for developing skills in children and also in teaching them. Right? So music therapy, for example, helps in healing dangerous and some chronic diseases. Our ancestors, our older people used to recommend that those women in our families who were expectant mothers should listen to beautiful chants, should listen to music, because they had a belief that that music will have had a therapeutic effect on the growing child in the womb. So, where did we learn this from? We learned this from our Vedas. So certainly music improves the mood, it improves the intelligence, it provides motivation, it also provides concentration, right? It helps in physical, emotional, cognitive, and social needs. So there's a universal value in the music, especially as we know it from the Samveda, right? And of course, it can be used in social cohesion, in building up, nation building. The idea that music transcends many differences in the world, it goes beyond, it cultivates innovation. And if you look at South Africa, for example, we've got racial, cultural, religious, class, gender, and age differences. But when we go to a concert, right, it's one of the few times when we will gather together with thousands of other people to engage in a shared activity. At that time, in a concert, we don't see people having particular colors. We don't know who is Christian and who is Muslim. We don't know who belongs to what gender. We are there forgetting all our differences. This is the value in music. There is something about listening to music and playing it with other people that brings its social buzz, that makes us feel connected to those around us. And we know of what people are referring to as fusion music these days, of how we are bringing together music from different parts of the world, including Africa. And people are enjoying this. So for me, the music that was introduced to us by the Samveda has universal value, because the instruments and all that does not belong to any one particular class. It does not belong to one language group. It belongs to all. And therein is the universal appeal for me as far as the Samveda is concerned.
Absolutely beautiful explanation, Panditji. Thank you for that. Certainly, music does unite the entire world. And I'm sure our listeners and viewers would agree. If you look at last year, there was a song called Jerusalema that came out. And it actually had the entire world dancing to its tune. People from all over the world putting the choreography together, and it was so wonderful to see the entire world coming together during this pandemic, dancing for this very spiritual song. And also just to add a bit there to what you've said, Panditji, as I mentioned to you, I'm a scholar of Kathak, which is a North Indian form of classical dance. And Kathak is derived from the word katha, which means to tell a story. And when I was studying Kathak, we were told that, back in the day, in the villages, for those citizens that were not literate, they did not know how to read and write, and they could not read the scriptures. Kathak came about to tell them the story from the scriptures, because a lot of our dances are comprised of, depiction of Lord Krishna and Radha. So yes, definitely also there as well to help those. I remember performing once. In Poland, and it was for the Festival of Chariots, and there was a blind girl that came up to us, and she, her mom asked if she could feel our jewelry and feel our costumes because she couldn't see us, but she was so enthralled because although she couldn't see, she could hear the music, she could hear the gungrus, and it kind of united her with us. It united her world of blindness with us, which was very, very special. So just to add a little bit to what you've just mentioned to us now, Panditji. Panditji, did you find any difficulty during your studies of our Hindu scriptures? Did you find any difficulty in studying and understanding the Samveda?
Okay, see, so firstly, in one sense, you can call me a purist, right? Because for me, the study of Hindu scriptures requires a sound knowledge of Sanskrit. And studying Sanskrit, for me personally, was not difficult, but it required consistent hard work. It was not difficult because, Sanskrit is a science and its rules are scientifically grounded. If you look at the Devanagari script, ka, ka, ga, gha, nga, the first set of groups are the gutturals. The second set of groups are the, you get p, p, or the next group, p, p, b. That's called your labials. Then you have the dentals, th, th, the, n. Now, look at how scientifically this language has been placed, that each group of consonants comes out from a particular part of the voice makeup. So from the gutturals, we have the k sounds. From the cerebrals, we have the ch sound. And what's interesting is it's called cerebral because if you say ch, you'll notice that the flat part of your tongue touches the roof of your mouth. So therefore it's called a cerebral. And when the tip of the tongue touches the teeth and we say th, then that's a dental. So you can see the science behind Sanskrit. So while I didn't find it difficult because of this scientific nature, it requires a lot of hard work. And so this, the scientific grounding helped in learning Sanskrit. And of course, you see, one can study scriptures if you're going to rely on secondary scripture. So if you're going to rely on somebody else's translations, that's fine. What you need to understand is that each person translates according to his or her own perspective. Whether we like it or not, when we translate, we have an agenda. So for example, Tulsidas rewrote Ramayana as Ramcharitmanas in Awadhi dialect because he had an agenda. And his agenda was that he wanted to make this Ram Katha equally available to all people. But he also wanted to manifest his own bhakti or devotion to Bhagwan Sri Ram. So all of us, but if you want authentic knowledge and you want to learn firsthand, then I think it's very important to learn Sanskrit, which, as I said, for me, I don't think it's a difficult language. I teach it now, and I still don't think that it's difficult for learners or people to learn it. So, knowing Sanskrit has allowed me to learn firsthand the meanings of the words. But that doesn't mean that I don't read other commentaries or other translations, because we need to be open-minded and we need to include all kinds of perspectives. But I wouldn't say that it was difficult, but it requires a lot of hard work. It requires a lot of dedication. And but certainly, so for a person who does not know Sanskrit, there are many useful, very good translations available on the internet, which one can use to make a more in-depth study of scriptures like the Samveda and other scriptures as well.
Panditji, how did you get inspiration, or what motivated you to study the Vedas, and particularly the Samaveda?
Well, I like that question because it gives me a chance to share my history with you. My grandfather, the late Pandit Ramlakan Tiwari, arrived in South Africa in 1911 when he was 17 years old, and he remained in this country. And as an 8 and 9-year-old boy, I remember sitting behind our house mandir, where he used to make me read Sanskrit texts, and he taught me Hindi. So the spark was ignited by him, and that spark was further, helped along by my father and my uncle, both of whom were Sanskrit graduates from the former University of Durban, Westville. So I've grown up in a family where we have been, the sanskar has been to learn Sanskrit, to speak Hindi. I can tell you an anecdote. There was a rule in my house. We used to have supper between 6 and 7 every day. And during that time, if any one of us spoke in English, my father used to say, you will be deprived of your supper. So if you wanted your supper between 6 and 7, you had to converse in Hindi. So whatever you wanted, I had to speak to my mother in Hindi, and we had to all speak to each other in Hindi. And so this is the kind of upbringing that I've had. And for me, that points to the whole issue of sanskar. You are never too young to start learning. So these have been the inspirations for me, to study Hindi and to study Sanskrit and to study the Vedas. Of course, I'm also a practicing priest, and I think I owe it to the people that I serve that I have a sound knowledge of scriptures, not just limited scriptures, but one should have an idea of a wide range of scriptures. So it's very important that I study Veda so that I can link. So if I'm doing a Satyanarayan Katha, I should be able to link the Satyanarayan Katha to the Vedas. Or if I'm doing a discourse on Ramcharitmanas, I should be able to link it to Upanishads. And so these are the things that motivate me. I want to be useful to the people that I serve. And in order to be able to do that, it's important that I study these various scriptures. Of course, correct pronunciation is very important. Hindi, Sanskrit, Indian languages is a phonetic language. What you read is what you write, and what you write is what you read. We don't have silent letters in Sanskrit, right? So it's a phonetic language. And one syllable mispronounced can change the meaning of a sentence. So, when we are saying, when we are reading prayers, we say, Nasti Tesham Amangalam. Now, if you don't understand Sanskrit and you say Nasti Tesham Mangalam, what you're saying to God is remove all Mangalam, remove all the auspiciousness from my life. Whereas what you should be saying is Nasti Tesham Amangalam. So you see, it's so important to be pronouncing correctly. People ask, oh, God knows what is in my heart. Yes, God knows what is in your heart, but we need to communicate clearly. Just as my mother knows what is in my heart, but if I don't communicate clearly to her, she's not going to give me what I want. So these are the things that motivated me. Correct pronunciation, correct chandas, correct meters has motivated me to study scriptures like the Vedas and other scriptures as well.
I totally agree with you, Panditji. They say communication isn't the key, comprehension is. So I totally agree with you there. And I think I'm going to take a leaf out of your book, or out of your parents' book, should I rather say, because my husband's always been on my case about teaching him Hindi. I am still a scholar of Hindi. I'm still learning. And so I think I'm going to deprive him of supper if he doesn't speak Hindi. Okay, Panditji, we've almost come to the end of our discussion on the Samaved. If you could please tell us, how important is it for our younger generation, for our young people to study the Samaved?
Yeah, okay. Well, I think we already know that the Vedas is a storehouse of knowledge from God, right? And I'm going to play the advocacy role here, and I'm unapologetic for that. It is the greatest body of knowledge known to humankind, right? See, the material world goes through changes, but the Vedic knowledge is eternal, so it is always relevant. See, the truth about the world does not change. The truth is always true, no matter what time or state the world is in. And this is why every young Hindu should study the Vedas as well as the Samveda, because that is one truth that is not going to change. Right? So you spoke about the social media earlier on. In social media, something is a truth as long as somebody else doesn't say something to you. So the truth is changing all the time. When it comes to study of the Vedas, that is the eternal truth. And this will grant the younger generation especially entry into the authentic knowledge of Sanatana Dharma. See, if I think of the youth of today, there are so many rival forces that they are competing, that's competing for their attention, right? So you've got the forces of the technocratic age. So you've got social media, etc. Then you've got HIV and AIDS. Now, more recently, it's the coronavirus. There's sexual and verbal abuse. We're reading about this in the media on a daily basis. We're reading about gender discrimination. We read about racial tensions, substance abuse. And all this, of course, is having a great effect on their identity. And so I feel that in such a climate, the youth of today need recourse to the resources that may assist them in overcoming the problems that are facing youth. And my contention is that the Vedas, including the Samaveda, can address the many challenges facing the youth of South Africa. So if we're looking for solutions to the problems that we are facing, for me, I feel that there is no better resource than the Vedas to find the answers to the problems in the world. Of course, the other scriptures are an extension of the Vedic principles. So studying other scriptures as well is very important. But I certainly feel that young people should place their faith and their trust in our scriptures, because therein lies their salvation. Dhanyavad.
Dhanyavad Panditji for that. I really do like what you said. Truth doesn't change. It remains constant. Very, very, very good words. And also the fact that, as the popular saying goes, an idle mind is the devil's workshop. So, with getting our young people, getting our youth involved with the theme of the Samaved, which is music and dance, getting them to utilize their energy there is so important. I see it with my younger nieces, and when you get them to utilize their energies in those things that are going to uplift them, it opens up other faculties for them as well. So definitely agree with you there. Thank you so much, Panditji, for enlightening us on the Samaved. We truly, truly appreciate your time as well as sharing your knowledge with us. Bahut bahut dhanyavad. And Thank you to the Swami Vivekananda Cultural Center at the Consulate General of India, Durban, for affording us this opportunity to share with everyone, all our listeners as well as viewers, knowledge and enlightenment on the Samaved. Thank you so much and namaste.
Indeed, thank you so much, Pandit Lokesh Maharaj Ji and Ms. Yudhisha Valikaran Ji, for that very interesting, knowledgeable interaction on Samved. Indeed, music and dance is something vital for us to live by, and we should definitely refer to Samved when listening to such a divine, would I say, mantras and shloks as well as music. We've come to the conclusion of episode 3 of Aarshdhara, I would like to introduce Mr. Sipiwe M. Chunu from the Swami Vivekananda Cultural Center at the Consulate General of India, Durban, to render this afternoon's vote of thanks.
Namaskar. Namaskar once again. Greetings to all of you. On behalf of Swami Vivekananda Cultural Center at the Consulate General of India in Durban, I am so pleased today to deliver a vote of thanks on today's episode 3 of the program, Aarshdara. This is an online series of interaction of scriptures composed by ancient sages of India. And today interaction was about the Samveda. Samveda in English, I picked up from Pandit Ji. It's a melody of knowledge. So I was very touched, Pandit Lokesh Ji, by the interactions that you had with Disha Ji, because to me, there is a sense that all the problems that we are facing today, the solutions were given many, many thousands and thousands of years ago. Whatever we are facing today, the Almighty gave us the solutions. As we are saying that the Samveda, as last time we dealt with the Veda, to me it is clear that the Veda, Samvedas are for all human race. They were not given to one particular race, but they were for all humankind. So the interaction that you gave today, sir, it was very touching. And to me, as I am not of Hindu faith, there is this thing that I always say, that knowledge is powerful. I know some of Hindu scriptures. I know about the Sanskrit today, the science of life. So that's why everybody is saying, knowledge is powerful. Allow me to thank Pandit Ji and Yudhisha Ji. Thank you very much, sir. The interaction that you conducted, it was Bodacha in Hindi. I know sometimes because of the love that we have for some languages, we end up making mistakes. So I am saying we are always making some mistakes on the way of pronunciation. We always make mistakes, but I am praying that I'm not saying, God, remove your blessing from me. The mistake that I can make, as you said, some mistake we cause by saying some wrong understanding, or we are saying wrong meaning. So I'm so touched by today's subject, and as I was touched by the Vedas, I am also touched by the Samvedas. I am learning. To me, I'm appreciating everything that Swami Vivekananda Cultural Center is doing, because I know that knowledge is powerful. Thank you very much, Ji. The interactions were very interesting on Samveda. To both of you, Pandit Lokesh Ji, Yudhisha Ji, thank you very much. And also allow me to thank Sri Rajesh Lakshman Ji for the remarks that he gave this evening. Thank you very much, sir. We always appreciate your existence in our program. Dhanyavad to all of you. To Director of Swami Vivekananda Cultural Center, Dr. Chaitanya Prakash Yogi, sir, thank you very much for all your efforts that you are doing to make sure all our programs are successful. Dhanyavad, sir, thank you very much. Srishti Ji, thank you, ma'am, for everything. Once again, thank you, Srishti Ji. Sri Piyush Khandelwal, thank you, sir, for everything. To all those who participated online today, we would like to say, please visit our Facebook page so that you will be updated about all cultural activities organized by Swami Vivekananda Cultural Center in Durban. Once again, Rajesh Lakshman Ji, Pandit Lokesh Maharaj Ji, Yudhisha Balikrishnan Ji, Dhanyavad to all of you. All of you have a wonderful evening. Namaskar.